Today's video will be covering more sensitive and controversial topics than I usually deal with. While I try to make my videos okay for an under 13 audience, I don't recommend watching this video if you personally do not find topics like book banning very comfortable to try and listen to. You have been warned. Thank you. I hate book banning. Like, really hate book banning. As someone who has been reading almost his entire life and has been taught to read a great variety of things and be interested in a great variety of topics, not just a constant deluge of graphic novels and comic books like I've read, it intensely frustrates me when books try to or are banned from public schools or by overly cautious parental groups. Let me put a little bit of into perspective. The Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark trilogy from Scholastic, banned. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by the legendary Mark Twain, both banned. George Orwell's legendary 1984, both banned in the United States for being pro-communism and banned in the Soviet Union for being anti-communism. Bridge to Terabithia, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, Captain Underpants series, The Night Kitchen. I can go on and on with how many books have been challenged or banned for tackling sensitive or controversial topics that parents think kids shouldn't handle or can't possibly handle reading about. And today we're looking at another one that's been added to the list. As I and many others learned yesterday, the graphic novel MAUS, M-A-U-S, has been banned from being taught in the Tennessee school district. MAUS is a story written by a Holocaust survivor using rats and cats as a metaphor to describe his experience with the atrocities that occurred. The book has been banned for showing brief nudity and tackling the Holocaust, as well as, I believe, cussing. For me, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. MAUS getting banned yesterday, learning that MAUS was banned yesterday, is what has finally made me decide to make a video like this. I unfortunately have not read MAUS. I've heard of it, but I unfortunately have not read it, so I can't give my own opinion on the book itself. But what I can give is my position on what the book does and my opinion on it being banned. I highly respect books written about the atrocities of World War II, especially from the people who went through it. The Sunflower, which I read last year, is a fascinating book about a Jew in captivity who was asked by a dying Nazi soldier for forgiveness while the Jew was still in a concentration camp during World War II. The first part of the book is his discussion about what led to that point, what he did, and how he tried to live with it for the rest of his life. And the second half was 50 different essays from many acclaimed and famous people around the world answering what they would do in that situation. Can you imagine something like that? Something as terrible as that. Imagine living in World War II and you lived in Germany and you had been trapped in concentration camps for years because of your religious belief. That these people hated you for no genuine reason. And that you were stripped from your family, forced to watch your loved ones die. And then a young Nazi soldier, a young member of the group that destroyed your life, is on his deathbed and tries to beg you for forgiveness. Can you imagine just being trapped in a situation like that and having to even make a decision? So why are these kind of things trying to be pushed away from kids? I am a huge believer in that kids should be allowed to learn about adult situations so that they aren't thrown into them awkwardly when they're older. We need kids to be taught about the major wars of their history. We need kids to be taught their anatomy, how their body works, and what it does, so that they are not ashamed of it, or so that they are not taught that it isn't okay for it to be seen. You are not getting the message when a character was something like MAUS, and you try and ban this book because it had brief nudity or a single image of a character nude that showed their breasts. You are not teaching kids that it is not okay to sexually look at people's breasts or any other inappropriate part of their body. You're teaching kids that's not okay for them to have that, and that they should be ashamed for having that body part because they're not supposed to be, because no one is supposed to be able to see it. And that is a disgusting lesson to be teaching young ladies and young men. There's a very famous saying, history is written by the winners. The other day I added to that saying. It now says, history is written by the winners, and they don't have to write how they won. This is not true with every book in America, but for a great deal of our history books, especially ones that are not textbook written, if it does not paint America in a positive light, it most likely will become a controversial and loathed book, particularly by adults. If it does not paint America, not as perfect, but if it does not paint America in the right, especially with wars. Imagine a textbook that was shown in U.S. public schools that portrayed America as the enemy in the Revolutionary War, that did it from the perspective of England or Great Britain. Imagine how well that would go over. When it's not, this is how the English felt, and they were in the wrong for that, or this is how America felt about that, this is how England responded. No. From the perspective of England, what America was doing and why it was wrong in their eyes. How long do you think a book like that would stay on the shelves? Keep in mind that in the early days of the Revolutionary War, with moments like the Stamp Act, Sugar Act, the Tea Tax, and the Boston Massacre, think about the Boston Tea Party. A group of Americans armed with hatchets dressed themselves as Indians, snuck aboard British ships, and destroyed all of its property loudly into all hours of the night, dumping over 300 pounds of tea into the harbor that they did not own and did not belong to them. Technically, that was a terrorist act, especially in Britain's eyes. Something like that was done today, we'd call it terrorism. We wouldn't call it patriotism. We wouldn't call it a blow for equality or blow for individuality or a blow for our independence from those who seek to persecute us. We would call it terrorism. But do we call the Boston Tea Party terrorism? No. Remember that. With the Revolutionary War, with the Boston Tea Party, America didn't exactly think that was a great idea. This was not something that the 13 colonies discussed and said, yes, this is how we get our message across to Britain. No, that was a large group of people that felt that way and chose to do that to respond to King George III and Parliament. Many Americans, including the legendary George Washington, hated the Boston Tea Party. A great deal of them said that they were willing to repay all the tea that was destroyed until King George III angrily closed down Boston Harbor. And yet the Boston Tea Party is one of the most famous and well-known moments in the Revolutionary War that is taught today, even though we are rarely taught the full thing. I am not saying that schools should be expected to teach all parts of a war when they do these units. But they should be able to actually teach them, and teach them in a way that kids will relate to or be drawn to. I did not learn everything about the Revolutionary War in my 8th grade social studies. I did not learn everything about World War II in my 7th grade social studies. I did a lot of additional research and additional reading because that's how I was raised up, to have a huge interest in it. But my schools started that. I was taught in elementary and through elementary and middle school, I was fully taught the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the years leading up to the Revolutionary War with the French and Indian War, and the years after with the War of 1812. World War I, fully, the entirety of World War II, repeatedly, and they did not cut the fat. They didn't cut the fat. They didn't trim the parts that they didn't like. They did not mince words. They were honest. They showed us what happened. They showed us the kind of things that people did. They showed us what people did back then, how they responded. They were honest. They understood that we needed to know this. And they did not hold back. I learned about some of the most disturbing things I have ever known in my life with how World War I and World War II occurred. I learned the kinds of weapons that were created and the kind of horrible things that they did to people. I learned about Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, Germany's Blitzkrieg, all of these horrendous events, and I actually got to see part of it. They actually showed us part of it. They told us what it was. They didn't just say, this is a war that Germany started with other countries. America worked with other countries. We won it, and we are good. I never had a teacher tell me that the Civil War was a good thing. I never had a teacher tell me that we were completely fine with declaring war on Great Britain with the Revolutionary War, or that the entire time either side was in the right. They did not give us their opinion. They gave us the facts and the truth, uncensored. But when you do things like this, Tennessee, not just Tennessee, America and the world, when you do things like this, when you take away books that cover these topics, and especially when you take away books that are done in a visual style that appeals to kids, draws them in, you are not letting them learn what they need to learn, whether that's your intention or not. Which do you think a middle schooler will be more likely to want to continue reading if he finds the World War II interesting? A standard textbook that just goes over the dates and what happened from the perspective of someone who writes about these things years later? Or a graphic novel that uses a metaphor that kids can understand clearly, written by a Holocaust survivor who can directly relate what happened to him? Which one is the kid going to want to read more and get more out of? And I know it does not stop there. I learned plenty about banned books when I was in middle school and got more familiar with certain series. And I'm going to be very careful how I say this next part. Catholicism and Christianity can be a very messy tool when it comes to allowing kids to read other topics. Please hear me. Bridge to Terabithia was challenged because people and adults thought the idea of two children creating their own nation, their own idea, was unchristian. The Harry Potter books are infamously banned and challenged for having been books that fully dealt with sorcery and witchcraft. And J.K. Rowling constantly was accused of being a devil worshiper or a witch herself, just because she wrote books about magic. The Bible clearly states that God does not like magic, and it clearly states that ghosts cannot exist in the concept of Catholicism. But something that even as a practicing Catholic, I have to remind myself is that the Bible was not written by God or Jesus or Mary. The Bible is written by 4 different people, all sinners, 4 different people who historically wrote the Bible. And I am neither saying that that makes the Bible omnipotent, nor that that makes the Bible a lie. I am saying that any Catholic who entirely goes off of the word of the Bible, not the word of God, but just what the Bible says, and refuses to listen or believe anything else, is not only deluding themselves to their true faith, but seriously harming their understanding of the world around them. So what can we even do about it? We know why some of these books get banned. Like, I understand where something like Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, I understand where something like that may get challenged and banned because of when it came out. A big difficulty with books, with classics written in the time they were, especially in a society like today, is how different a world it was back then with what was acceptable, what was considered right, what was considered okay to make fun of or accuse. Another wonderful example of recent book banning that happened last year is another 6 Dr. Seuss books pulled out of circulation, most notably his first book, And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. It was pulled for a single drawing of a Chinese man with yellow skin and thin pencil eyes. That single drawing got that book banned. Let me again make my position clear. I am not saying it's okay to teach these kids that stereotyping is okay. But you cannot just blot it out and paint over it like this by banning it. Show some effort and teach the kids why this isn't okay and why they thought it was okay back then. Do not just pretend something like the Jim Crow laws did not exist. Teach kids that they existed and show them why it is not okay. I challenge you to find a single LGBTQ book in the past 5 years. Any book, especially a children's novel, that had a main character who was gay, be challenged. Find a single one that was not challenged. You will be amazed how much of an issue this still is. As a huge supporter of the LGBTQ plus community, I am sick to death of seeing this. I view racism as something that is hit toward both people on their race and their sexual identity. And I am so sick of seeing it. Don't ban a book because it has a gay character in it and you don't want to try and teach your kids what gay is. Let the book be read and interpreted by your kids. Shaming someone because of their sexual identity because they want to change something that they had no option of at birth, and is how they feel, is disgusting and insulting. Because you are telling these kids to not be who they are. With all of that said, what are you supposed to do about it? The adults have the power. The school districts have the power. The parental groups have the power. It's parent groups that said that comic books were evil and would rot kids' brains. That rock and roll was evil and would rot kids' brains. That video games are evil and would rot kids' brains. And the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. The 1950s, when comic books were at their all-time low, a great deal of that was due to a book called Seduction of the Innocent by a psychiatrist whose name I thankfully cannot remember at this time. I heavily loathe the fact that the book even exists, because it was a book written by a psychiatrist who hated comic books. And the entire book was saying that all forms of comic books were overly violent and would destroy kids' minds. And I mean every form. He went through every single comic book topic you can think of at that time, right down to funny animal comic books for children, where he said, quote, I quote, "Rabbits carry atomic guns and threaten to kill ducks." No comic book was safe from him in that book. And parents fell for it and read it and read it, and comic book burnings became a major thing. Not banning, burnings. Book burnings. Something that I thought we got over a long, long time ago. Comic books in the 50s became extremely violent, and it was focused less on bright, colorful superhero stories and more about intensely violent crime stories, where the focus was more about robbers fighting cops and how many violent ways they could do it to attract kids' attention. And those books nearly killed the comic book industry as we know it. But the problem with that is we made it through that. The comic book industry made it through book burnings like that. And children and adults, not children, adults, seeing them as never doing anything good for their children, never providing any new ideas or positive thoughts or emotions or concepts, refusing to give their kids the opportunity to decide if this stuff was good for them, or to decide if they wanted to continue this. They didn't think the comic books could ever have any positive effect on kids or adults, or that they would even be okay for adults, and that they would never go anywhere or affect any other part of our culture. And just look what the comic industry has given to us in the past 50 years. Think about it. Comic books, for the most part, have made it out of that dark time. Barely. Rock and roll made it out of that dark time. Video games has definitely made it out. Made it out and become the successful juggernaut it is today. So why are books, not actual, but other books, still going through the same horrendous treatment of censorship and hiding and controversy that it has been going through in over 1,000 years of publish, at least? Why are we still having these arguments? Why are we still doing this to our children? Why are we still doing this to adults? Why are we taking the stuff that actually benefits our kids and shoving it under the rug like it doesn't exist because it isn't happy or it's adult. You can't keep kids away from adult situations and expect them to be able to handle it when they are adults. It does not work. So I ask you, viewers, I ask you to do the right thing with this, because the right thing is not as easy as it may seem. The right thing is to not petition, to not angrily attack. Sorry. Do not petition this. Do not picket sign this. Do not get up in arms angrily demonizing the people who ban these books or challenge them. Because violence can't be solved with violence when it comes to something like this. Instead, I thank the legendary Stephen King for this, because he personally has said that he goes through this all the time. He has dealt with this a lot and he hates seeing it, but this is his suggestion. Run. Don't walk to your nearest library or your nearest bookstore and buy these books that you're trying to ban. Buy these books. Read these books. Because if they are trying to keep you from seeing and thinking about these books, then you clearly need them in your head. We can have entire groups of people who attack Black people, who attack LGBTQ plus people, who are intensely racist and shove their opinions everywhere. And instead of focusing on combating those problems and these controversies that should be done with, we are wasting our time getting rid of the stuff that our kids need to learn. And that needs to end. It has to end now. So serious. So really, listen to me. Read Tom Sawyer's. Read Huckleberry Finn's. Read things like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. But don't just read them. Consider them. Think about them. Discuss them with others. Because it's not as simple as just kids need to see all of these topics. And I don't think that elementary is the right age to shove these topics in people's faces, in these kids' faces. But make sure the book is honest and preferably unbiased. I appreciate your question, JC. To be honest, the kind of books I would object to, I'm sorry, that's a really good question. I really appreciate it, but it's tricky because I get more worked up about how much is kept from kids the more and more I learn about it. Because I have not had many experiences with books that I felt I shouldn't have been forced to read or that I had to see. See, it's that with history books, I prefer unbiased history books that just tell the story, particularly with the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. I will not trust a Civil War book that is told from someone's opinion. It's with the Civil War. I do not care if they sided with the Union or they sided with the Confederates. I would not read a book on either side because they are telling their side of the story, not what happened, their side. And I am very done with people shoving their opinions down other people's throats. As extremely hypocritical as that probably is, considering what I've just spent the past half hour doing. But what I mean is, I want to remind that this is my opinion. This is just my opinion. A high school seniors who has dealt with controversy, with book controversy in his past, dealt with book bannings, been taught that books were evil, that there were books that were unchristian, and that these should not be read, and that the authors were horrible people. And I had to try and I learned that, and I took that too literally. There were times where I took that, like I really thought that. I believed for a while that the Harry Potter books, that I shouldn't read the Harry Potter books in 4th grade because I was told that they were not okay from a religious standpoint. And the same person who told me that said that the Narnia books were completely okay to read. When I look back on it, I think, what about that exactly is the problem between the Narnia books and the Harry Potter books, perspective of what these say and what they teach? But what my problem was at the time was I took that very literally, and I awkwardly talked to my parents about it, very awkwardly, because I wasn't scared, but it's what I believed in. So my parents personally did some research about it. They personally did research, and they personally discussed it with me. And I calmed down because I actually talked to them about it. That's another good example, JC. My answer to that is, I'm not familiar with the book you're talking about, but I understand. I think I have a good interpretation of what it's all about already. But actually, I don't think any books written by politicians should be allowed in middle schools. And I mean any politicians. The farthest I would go is autobiographies. I don't think that books written by politicians are okay to teach in middle schools or high schools, because those books are some of the most opinionated books you will ever find. That is not okay. Kids should not be taught what a politician thinks, because that is not the politician's job. The politician's job is not to tell the public what they should think. The public's job is to tell the politician how they feel, and the politician acts on it. That is how democracy works. We established a president so that there would be someone to lead us who listened to us, who understood our rights that we established as Americans. Exactly, JC. Like, I really concur with that. And I think that's a good place to end on. Learn what books are becoming banned or that have been banned, and personally read them. Personally decide if you find them okay. Because I am not just talking about this about MAUS because it was banned as teaching for Tennessee schools. I'd be talking about MAUS if it was banned, period. The schools just hits it harder for me. Because when the adults decide what is okay for kids to see, and I don't just mean like with movies, I mean when the adults decide what is okay for their kids to learn about history, not just to learn in general, but to learn about history or to learn about their own bodies or the things that they need to know to interact in society correctly and safely, then these kids are not coming out with the skills they need to know, and they have no idea how to respond with the skills they don't know. They have no idea how to respond to it. If an LGBTQ plus kid wants to be more open about their sexual identity and wants to feel like they are accepted by society and that is okay, but all of this around them, all of this controversy is constantly hitting them about how that's a terrible thing and so many people hate it, and that's un-Catholic, and that God hates gay people, and all of this. that they are being fed and having to hear from all sides. How is that kid supposed to be able to feel comfortable with their decision and be able to make one that defines them? And whether that is the adult's intention or not, where this is a plan to make their thoughts their own instead of the child's or the teenagers or the young adults or even the adults, it still is not okay. So I leave on this. Read. Don't just listen, read. Interpret, understand, research, discuss with others passively. Ask, what did you get out of this? I read this book, MAUS, and it's about a Holocaust survivor. And he uses a metaphor of mice and cats. I thought it was a really powerful book. What did you think of it? Well, I haven't read it yet. I don't know. I get concerned about wartime books. No, it's okay. This isn't from the perspective of someone who's talking about what happened. This is from the perspective of someone who experienced and had to go through it. And that's the most credible source you can possibly get. I thank you all for listening. Please know that I did not make this video to cause controversy. I did not make this video to shove my opinion about book banning down others' throats. I made this video because of how much I feel this topic and issue needs to be covered. And I will leave you with this. The slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat me. The slithery D, he came out of the sea. He ate all the others, but he didn't eat. Thank you all for watching. I'm Paul. I will see you guys next time.